Thank you, Tom. I can have you all arrested. Those who are clapping will be arrested last. It's truly a pleasure to be here in this vast space. It's good to be here with members of the public, members of the media, also lobbyists and elected officials, who I sometimes refer to as future defendants. On a serious note, it is sometimes nice to be able to put actual faces to the names in all those wiretap applications. And you're all much better looking than you look in those wiretap applications. So it's a big honor. First I want to say, I also read first read, but after I hit the snooze button 3 or 4 times. Newsmaker of the Decade is a big title. I appreciate it. I remember when I got the call, I didn't understand what decade we were talking about. You got the 80s, the 90s. So apparently it's the decade ending 2016, which is a bit odd. It's not the normal calendar decade. Maybe it's like the fiscal decade or something. But congratulations on your 10th anniversary. I want to congratulate you all also. You can clap for the 10th anniversary. And I mean the first person to congratulate you on this specific milestone, but I want to congratulate all of you also on being, after only Town and Country, the second most popular periodical, named after 2 required fatals on a mail order form. City and state, I'm really looking forward to the launch of Street and Zip Code. I think that's going to be an awesome publication. And if that email comes out at like 6:30, I'll get up for it. I also want to say the venue is terrific. I understand from Tom that the original plan was a different restaurant in Times Square. And then it was announced that I would be the newsmaker of the fiscal decade. And the venue was changed to this terrific spot, Vermilion, which I understand to be Indian fusion. Now I'm kind of Indian fusion myself. So I think that's kind of nice. Picking a place, having some association with the honoree. So just think, if it had been Mayor de Blasio, we'd all be eating at the Park Slope YMCA. And it would be pizza with a knife and fork. It's just jokes. So I look back to see in what company I was, and it's a very estimable company, at the prior annual honorees, but what really especially caught my eye was the list of the runners-up. That's quite a list. And I noticed that runners-up in prior years included, among others, Sheldon Silver, Pedro Espada, Elliot Spitzer, and Anthony Weiner. So I want to say to City and State, way to pick them, guys. So given that, I'm especially glad to not be the runner-up. Talk about the kiss of death. So I don't know if you guys have seen the magazine, the runner-up that you have named for Newsmaker of the Decade is former Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So let me just say, best wishes, Mike. And I know what Mike is thinking. He's thinking, God, I really hope this is another Steve Harvey screw-up. You guys don't want this America. Okay. In all seriousness, what I think and hope this honor means is that you're recognizing not something that I have done, merely because I do very little, but you're recognizing what my office does as a collective matter. People sometimes think that I do the work. I don't. The work is done by the fantastically talented, committed men and women in my office, along with all their partners at the NYPD, the FBI, the DEA, and every other phenomenal law enforcement agency in New York. And I have the best team in the world. I really do. And sometimes it's comical when people forget this and ascribe too much importance to what I do. For example, who can forget the wiretap of a certain Adam Skillos, who was caught on tape saying the following, quote, "It's like effing Preet Bharara is listening to every effing phone call," including that one. But I didn't hear it first. It was told to me. The men and women of my office, and some of you who work with them, are dedicated every day to what? To keeping our streets safe, our homeland secure, our markets fair, and our government honest. We care about all of those things. So you denoted me Newsmaker, which is nice. Well, my office makes news because my office makes cases. Important cases, we think impactful cases, groundbreaking cases. And not just cases against corrupt public officials, although we care about that a lot, but also against murderers, cyber criminals, arms traffickers, drug dealers, gang members, insider traders, Ponzi schemers, and every type of fraudster you can imagine. We try to bring justice not only to broken correctional institutions like Rikers Island, but also to communities facing discrimination because of race or disability, and we also, of course, are going to have them arrested. They're my peripheral vision. I don't even need to look at them. And we also, of course, prosecute terrorists, like the Times Square bomber, Faisal Shahzad, and just last week, the alleged Chelsea bomber, Ahmad Khan Rahami. And I think we should give a round of applause to the FBI agents and the NYPD. But I hope that what you recognize also is that just as important as what we do is how we do it. We teach our people, like I was taught when I came into the office, that you perform your duties in one fashion only. You do the right thing, in the right way, for the right reasons. Always, that's it. And no particular case or conviction could ever make me more proud than the principles that underlie how my folks do their work. We consider ourselves to be fearless and also independent. There's a reason why we're called the Sovereign District of New York. It has been joked that we have our own foreign policy. More on that in a moment. But we believe fundamentally, and I think you want us to believe this, that no one is above the law, no matter who you are, who you know, or how much money you have. Whether you are a bully, or a billionaire, or both, we really don't care. And we will walk away from cases also. We're fearless in both directions. Fearless in bringing a case that needs to be made, and in walking away when justice doesn't suggest that we bring the case. We do our job because it is the job to be done. Now, overall, I think that's what people appreciate about our office, but it never ceases to amaze me. How many people don't get that? How many people think there is some ulterior motive, that there is some hidden agenda, there is some undisclosed bias, there is often a questioning of motives? So I've been doing this job for a little over 7 years, and I get a lot of criticism. You guys have been great. I get a lot of criticism from a lot of places the office does. I've been accused of being anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-Latino, anti-Russian. I've actually been banned personally by name by Vladimir Putin from going to Russia, which I consider to be a badge of honor. I'm not sure I can go to Jamaica, Venezuela, or Switzerland. And there has been a time recently when I was even accused of being anti-Indian, even though, as you know from my fusion comment, I was born in India. And the misunderstanding and confusion causes me to chuckle. I'm going to share 3 quick funny examples with you. I mentioned the problems that I had with people who thought I was a self-loathing Indian. 3 years ago, we arrested this mid-level diplomat named Devyani Kobagade, who, in not the case of the century, we accused, line-level assistants accused, based on referral from the State Department, of not paying proper wages to her domestic worker. So the victim was also of Indian extraction, and we claimed that she lied on her visa, and instead of paying her the supposed and required $9 an hour, they're paying her under $1 an hour. And people went bananas in the country of my birth because of her arrest. And many people began to say in the press, in India, where I was born, that I was a terrible person. I think my dad called me one day and said, "You have just been named in Keith Olbermann style as the worst person in India." I was trending in India negatively because people said I am trying to show myself to be, very American, even though I was born in India. So the son of India was being criticized, and one day I had to explain to my daughter what Uncle Tom meant, because she was looking over my shoulder, and people were saying that Preet is actually deciding to prosecute someone of his own background and culture to prove himself, and this is a quote, to prove himself to his white masters. Presumably, Eric Holder and Barack Obama. So I didn't take that one too seriously. Second example, another Indian American. I don't know what it is with the Indian Americans. Career prosecutors in my office charged a gentleman by the name of Dinesh D'Souza, who I think used to be important in some way. He was charged with campaign finance fraud. Again, he used straw donors. Not the case of the century, but it's a case that was brought to us, and we brought in a professional way. He pled guilty in the case because, as he told the judge, he was in fact guilty. That's how it works. And we argued for jail time, but not overly vociferously. He got 8 months in a halfway house and 5 years probation, no jail time. Which is fine, because as I said, it was not the crime of the century. This was about 2 years ago. So Mr. D'Souza writes a book, I don't know that many people have read it, in which he presents himself as the persecuted hero, presenting the following feverish description of the importance of his case, not only to me, but to the leader of the free world, Barack Obama. He writes, quote, she's talking about the time where he got sentenced not to prison, but to a halfway house, great victory for him. And he writes, quote, the prosecutor, Carrie Cohen, looked crushed as she left the court. Now, Carrie Cohen, by the way, never looks crushed, ever. She was one of the prosecutors on the Sheldon Silver case. And he writes, she avoided looking at me. Politically, she knew that I had won. And she also knew I knew. He continues, pretty soon, she would have to tell Bharara, that's me, who would probably recognize instantly that he was not going to succeed Eric Holder. And he would have to tell Holder, who would have to tell Obama. None of these thugs in power would be happy to hear the news, and there's an exclamation mark. And he writes with great passion, as I left the courtroom, My smile reflected the fact that all these scenarios were moving quickly through my mind, close quote. I find it hard to believe that anything moves quickly through his mind. I can tell you, you have to take me on faith, the record will reflect that I never advised Eric Holder of anything related to the case, and I'm pretty confident the President of the United States had better things to do. But if you ever have an issue dedicated to greatest narcissist of the decade, you might have a candidate in Mr. D'Souza. Third example, this happened last week, of people ascribing motives to us that I think are kind of comical. Some of you may realize, some months ago, the career prosecutors in my office arrested a Turkish national by the name of Reza Zar, and the case is pending before a judge in the Southern District. He was a figure of some notoriety, has a lot of money in Turkey, and it was a big deal in Turkey. I literally gained 300,000 Twitter followers in 5 days. The leadership of Turkey has claimed for a period of time that a lot of their problems are caused by someone by the name of Fethullah Gulen, who is an exiled cleric who lives in Pennsylvania, in the United States. I had never heard of Mr. Gulen until I Googled him, which was after I was accused of being a Gulen follower in certain Turkish circles. You may remember that there was an attempted coup in Istanbul a few months back, and I know you find this bizarre, that I'm talking to a New York State crowd. It's a big deal in Turkey. And you would think that the case would just proceed as you would expect it to proceed, but last week, the president of Turkey himself, President Erdogan, you think you have problems. The president of Turkey himself accused me by name of having been wined and dined on a visit to Turkey by the people who staged the coup that, by the way, resulted in the death of hundreds of people. So I hear that Turkey is a beautiful country, but I have never set foot in Turkey in my life. The closest I have been to Turkey is at the dinner table on Thanksgiving. I don't know if you're clapping for Thanksgiving, for Turkey, for Erdogan, but I thought it was important, and I think I have some Turkish friends here, and I thought it was important to say, it's ludicrous. And if people want to ask President Erdogan that question, be my guest. Before I sit down, I just want to say a couple of things about the press, because we're here at the invitation of City and State. There's one guy who likes the press. Not there. Alexander Hamilton, I don't know. We can't do our jobs alone. I have often said that no serious social problem, political problem can be solved by prosecution. It may be important to put corrupt politicians in prison, but it's not sufficient. It may be necessary, but not sufficient. And what the press does is incredibly important, fundamentally important, especially investigative journalism. I like to quote Edward R. Murrow, who once said, quote, "A nation of sheep will beget a government of wolves." And the press is central to preventing that, vital to preventing that. Two quick examples. We brought this enormous case in New York City some years ago, since I've been a U.S. attorney, called City Time. And we worked with other prosecutors and agencies in New York, and it was a $500 million fraud against the city of New York in connection with creating a software program about payroll. And the reason that we got involved in that case, because of intrepid investigative reporting by someone at the Daily News. So we read the newspaper, and that caused us to bring a case where a number of people went to prison, and we got the company, SAIC, to make the city whole. We gave a check of $500 million for the city of New York to Mayor Bloomberg. The case that we brought last week, that some of you were here because you thought I was going to talk about it, but you were wrong, relating to the Buffalo Billion. We arrested nine people last week. And I never got the question at the press conference, how did you start that investigation? Sometimes investigations start because the cooperating witness comes forward, or sometimes you have a tip, or sometimes there's a whistleblower. That case got started because journalists in Buffalo and elsewhere started to write that there were shenanigans, they believed, that were going on with the bidding of contracts in Buffalo. And you know what we did? We started to investigate. So that started because of the work that people like Tom Allen and others do at City and State. So I'm going to congratulate you on that. And just make, we don't do our work in a vacuum. And a lot of the greatest work that prosecutors and watchdogs do comes from work that journalists do. And I would encourage anyone who's able to fund investigative journalism to spend money on it, because it's money well spent and it's good for the public. So let me end by saying, yes, clap it. Let me end by saying something that was in the article in the magazine. You probably haven't read it. People often ask, is it odd to oversee federal prosecution? Because we, in our jobs, see the worst. We see the worst of people. We see killers, thieves, terrorists. And people ask how we remain idealistic when that's what we see every day. And you asked me, Tom, that question. And the answer I gave you and I'll give to all of you tonight, the reason is because in my job I also get to see the best in people. The men and women in my office who work hard to do the right thing, to right wrongs, and to do justice. So I want to close with a passage that has always meant a lot to me, and Tom and I talked about this also. To this day, no class, no professor, no law book has ever conveyed to me more powerfully or persuasively what it means to be a human being as a lawyer than these words uttered by the great defense lawyer Clarence Darrow in the case of the People versus Henry Sweet. And I happened to, when I was 15 years old, many years ago, commit these words to memory for a speech competition, but they speak to me to this day, and I hope they speak to you. And he said, quote, "After all, every human being's life in this world is inevitably mixed with every other life. And no matter what laws we pass, no matter what precautions we take, unless the people we meet are kindly and decent and human and liberty-loving, then there is no liberty. Freedom comes from human beings rather than from laws and institutions." Close quote. To my mind, the law is merely an instrument. And without the involvement of human hands, the law is as lifeless and uninspiring as a violin kept in its case. The law cannot compel us to love each other or respect each other. It cannot cancel hate or conquer evil, teach grace or extinguish apathy. Every day, the law's best aims are carried out for good or for ill by human beings. And so the last thing I want to say is I am more than blessed to be able to carry out my duties with the very best group of human beings that I know. The men and women of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. This honor is their honor. Thank you. Thank you very much.